Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we discuss the week's hottest legal topics. Up this week, we have an update on Trump's cases in light of the Supreme Court ruling from this summer on presidential immunity. We've had quite the bit of action down in Florida. We have the D.C. case being reopened and rebegun. We've got sentencing for the criminal case in New York. We've got the Georgia case, which is put on hold indefinitely. So we want to give you an update on those cases. The other thing we want to do in today's episode is do some more politics along with this law, because we haven't talked about the presidential pick for VP yet. So last time we were speaking, we did talk about J.D. Vance being chosen by Donald Trump. This week, we finally have Kamala Harris picking Walz. I'm terrible, you all. I'm trying to do it right. Walz, the governor from Minnesota, to be her running mate for the presidential election. So we're going to talk about some of that, throw a book or two in between, and have a great discussion for the end of summer. I think a lot of people are going back to school this week. I know, at least in Tennessee, where you are, Dr. Vile, the students started this week or even last week. Yeah, so hopefully this will get us off to a good start for the school year for everybody. Welcome back to school. We are glad to have you and hope that you're enjoying this podcast. My name is Virginia Tarani. I'm the CEO of The Law Unscripted, which hosts this podcast of the Legal Weekly Wine, as well as its own podcast. I also run Tarani Law LLC, because you never need a lawyer till you do. And that's up in Maryland. And we also do work in Virginia and DC. Joining me as my colleague in both The Law Unscripted and Tarani Law is Chelsea Rogers. Chelsea, thanks for being here.
Hey, good morning. Glad to be here. We have a lot to talk about this week.
As always. And to help us get through the discussion, we've got our trusted friend and advisor, Dr. John Vile from the Honors College of Middle Tennessee State University. He's dean there, but he's also been a professor for decades of political science and constitutional law. So he is our sitting resident expert on all things constitution related, as well as politics. So he's going to help navigate us through the political portion as we all talk about the legal portion. Don't forget to check out thelawunscripted.com. Guys, we have both of the podcasts set up there where you can listen and watch for free through our various platforms. We also have bar and law school prep classes. So we've gone through the 8 core subjects. I know that the bar season is over for July, but those of you in law school who are learning those 8 core subjects, including evidence and constitutional law, we have lecture series, video review series. We have hypotheticals that you can do with us in, almost in person going on. And we've got a couple of specials running on the website and our products. Also, if you don't want law school products, but you have a funny bone, check out our merchandise. We have got some good shirts up there with some great sayings. We've got a tumbler that says, allegedly, this is coffee. That's become a hot item. I'm very coffee related, so my shirt that we're getting says, I plead the 5th cup of coffee. Very excited about that shirt. We also have new Law Unscripted t-shirts being sold there too. So we have been wearing the Tarani Law shirts. We're going to be wearing the Law Unscripted shirts starting next week since we have those. But check those out and hopefully you'll find something that you or your family or friends would like, even if you're not an attorney. At least have a good chuckle at the merch page and check that out. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel that you're watching or listening to so that we pop up in your feed and are more accessible to others. Google and YouTube, they have those rankings as to the people who access the site and watch the site more, get more credit, get more views. So we'd love to have other people watch us too. It is the Legal Weekly Wine. It is very rare when I don't drink wine on the show. Chelsea, are you drinking wine?
I'm not. I have caffeine today. I'm back at it with the Celsius this morning.
Okay, what flavor do you have?
Today is just a plain orange situation. Okay. I really like this one, though.
Okay, and Dr. Vile's got the water, trusty water, no Pepsi yet today.
Too early.
Okay. Well, I have to confess to everyone, we're taping early in the morning. We are not taping in happy hour, and usually we try to tape around happy hour so we can enjoy that glass of wine with you. Today, it is rather early when we're taping, so I also defaulted to caffeine this morning. I went with Alani Juicy Peach.
I love those. Those are so good.
I will tell you, so they're kind of like a Monster or a Red Bull is the type of drink that it is. But I will tell you, it tastes better than most of the others that I have drunk, and this one feels like I am actually eating a full peach. Usually, there's some kind of aftertaste or bitter taste that's like, okay, I could tell it's flavoring. This one, I thought that I would feel the fuzzy peach on my tongue. That's how much this tastes like a peach.
In Georgia, when you go to school and turn on the water fountains, they have peach juice comes out.
Yes.
Chelsea can tell you.
I can vouch for it. 1,000% true.
That's funny. Well, as the Georgia peach, I would love for you to get one of these and let us know what you think of them for the peaches, because it really feels like I'm eating it off of the bush. So it's very delightful.
They grow on trees, sweetheart.
I was about to ask, but then I was like, I don't want to be the person who doesn't know that.
Okay. You're right. They do grow on trees. I am not that silly. But I will say when they get full enough and they pull the tree down, it looks more like a bush because they're all practically on the ground rather than hanging in the tree like the apples. Okay, whatever.
That's how you know how much I love Virginia. I was just ready to accept it. I said, okay. I was just ready. I was in.
Thank you, Chelsea. I appreciate the loyalty. My own dad doesn't have loyalty, but Chelsea does. Oh, goodness. Okay, so let's get started. And since we're in a jovial mood, I think let's start with the political part of it. There's always a little underlying constitutional law with it that will hit. But we do want the update because it's hard to pass political news with the legal news. And quite honestly, it's what's happening right now. So let's talk about the pick. Last time we talked about J.D. Vance and him being chosen by Trump. And our idea politically was that it was probably a fairly decent pick for him because he chose someone from a swing state. He chose someone that seems to be popular with Trump's entrenched party and decisions and ideas. But a lot more has been coming out about Vance since he was picked. And I'll be interested in everyone's opinions, but he's made some very shocking statements, some very interesting statements. We're going to talk about those statements, what he's been saying, what we think it will do to the campaign, and compare and contrast that with Walz. Walz has not been around much yet. He was just chosen this last week by Kamala Harris, so we have yet to see the full effect of him on her campaign. Kind of like Vance, it's taken a couple of weeks for things to come out. But Dr. Vial, I want to start with you by asking, how much relevance and how much effect does a vice presidential pick actually have on an election?
Not a lot. Occasionally, you'll gain a state where the candidate is from. In this case, Ohio is pretty Republican. Minnesota, fairly Democratic, so probably not going to make much a difference there. Occasionally, part of the problem with being a vice president is you don't want a vice president who upstages the president, and that's could be a problem. Probably more likely with Vance than with Trump. So that's something you have to occasionally. There was, I'm trying to remember which election it was, the election 1972, I believe, when George McGovern ran and chose a vice president who was subsequently found to have had shock treatments for a psychiatric disorder. And I don't, people have had that and been perfectly fine thereafter, but I think the fact that it hadn't been disclosed, he actually switched vice presidential candidates, which is a little like what's happening this year at the presidential
Biden.
level, for obviously for a different reason. Um, I think both candidates seem to have chosen people who are, they, particularly in Harris's case, she seems to have chosen Walz partly on the basis that they just get along well.
The relationship.
Yeah, they seem fairly ideologically similar to one another.
He's
I have
fairly
always
conservative
thought-
for a Democrat, though.
Pardon?
He's fairly conservative for a Democrat, though.
Well, he was more conservative as a member of Congress than he was as a governor, in terms of policies. But again, I think a lot of this year's is going to center more on the character of the individuals, perhaps than on public policies. One of the things I found very interesting is, Trump has been touting that we're not going to tax tips. And Harris came out for the same thing, maybe a little bit better modification, saying that it should only be for people in the service industries. Make sure that, you don't tip your lawyer in place of paying them and then have it tax deductible.
Right.
But it's, Vance is supposed to be appealing to white, male, middle to lower class, particularly in Appalachian region. I'm not sure that he's pulling that off very well. Particularly his comment on, and I'm glad someone shares my lack of enthusiasm for cats. But, to characterize anybody who doesn't have children as a cat woman is probably not politically very astute. He's trying to move it. And I don't know that he's moved it, but, he's now saying, well, he's not opposed to cat woman. He's opposed to people who are anti-child. And I sort of get it if you're opposed to abortion, as I largely am. You are concerned about children. On the other hand, that's, I know a lot of aunties and people who serve serve as public servants and nurses and teachers who are not necessarily, in fact, in early America, if you were a teacher, you weren't permitted to get married. It was thought that would interfere with your job. And so I don't think he's done it. The more he explains, sort of the worse I think probably it gets. Walz himself appears to have overstated
his military service.
His military
his
career.
military service. Although, again, Donald Trump, as I understand it, got out of military service in Vietnam by claiming to have bone spurs. And I don't know if calling attention to a vice president's 24 years of service compared to the president he's opposing, no years of service, is really a good overall long-term strategy.
Right. So I want to go back to this cat statement. Chelsea, and I'll warn everybody, Chelsea and I are a little worked up on it.
I do not like this man. I'm sorry. I'm going to say it. Everyone wants to talk about bias. I do not like JD Vance for a lot of reasons. This one, okay. I am not personally offended by this because I think he's a weirdo and I don't really care what his opinion.
You're using Waltz's statement.
Yes, I like it.
Weirdo.
I think there's nothing funnier than calling someone a weirdo or a loser. Like that's loser behavior, and that is so funny to me. But these statements, excuse me, Virginia, I know you have your list of quotes, so I'm going to let you do it.
I do. Okay, so I want to make sure we have what is actually being said. So I'll make the statements in this. Then, yes, Chelsea and I, we do have a couple of comments.
Just a couple.
So the first things that seemed to come out were this childless cat lady issue where he's saying...
And that's an old quotation,
It
by
is,
the way.
from 2021.
Prior to running for vice president.
Right. That he's saying, he's referring to, in the quote, Kamala Harris, as a childless cat lady. And it's a very derogatory phrase because he's saying that childless cat ladies are miserable and have no, quote, no direct stake in America's future. He then said, let me make sure that I can read this. So he's claiming that the U.S., this was in 2021, was being run by, quote, a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made. And so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. Then he started dropping names. So it's just a quote, it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. How does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it? Then let me make sure I've got the other one, because he even took a step farther, which was, here we go. We've allowed ourselves to be dominated by childless sociopaths. They're invested in nothing because they're not invested in this country's children.
May I make a comment here?
Please.
Because the newspapers so far haven't taken my article. But, there are two theories of sociopathic behavior.
Okay.
One is Vance's theory, that you become a sociopath because you don't have children. And the other, which is far more familiar to me, is that insanity is hereditary. You get it from your children.
Right? I will say my stepchildren have made me much more sociopathic than before I had them. Now, okay, so Chelsea, I'm going to come to you in a second.
Yeah.
But I have to say, with my own personal identity and history, I am so offended by these statements, whatever time period they were said. And even recently, he's affirmed those statements, saying I'm sorry, but that's exactly what I meant. His wife has come out saying, drawing it back just a piece to, he didn't mean people who can't have children. But as a woman, as a mother of stepchildren and none of her own children, as a sister to a wonderful woman who could not have children of her own and tried IVF and then adopted twice, this is so offensive to me on a very basic level. Kamala Harris, he's saying, is a childless cat lady. She has 2 stepchildren. He's referring to Pete Buttigieg, who with his husband has adopted at least 1 child. So we're cutting.
Twins, I believe.
What's that? Twins?
I believe they adopted twins.
That sounds right. So he's lumping step parents and adopted parents into this. And the suffering that I watched my sister go through to have children and then to adopt 2 beautiful children who are 10 and 12 now. I am offended for them. I'm offended for myself. I did not have children. I have 2 beautiful stepsons. I would not have had any if I didn't have them. I had endometriosis. I had a full hysterectomy. I couldn't do it. I could not have children. But now I don't have a direct stake in American democracy because
Neither, by the way, did George Washington.
Exactly. How many founders?
Neither did, the father of our country. Neither did James Madison, father of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
And Thomas Jefferson had illegitimate children.
Mm-hmm.
So so it's extremely offensive to me as a career woman, as a mother of stepsons, as an aunt of adopted children, on so many levels. It feels like a very personal attack. I am a childless cat woman who is miserable. I'm a sociopath. I'm miserable. I have no direct stake in American democracy. I don't know how I could have lived my life any different to be less interactive with American society. I have such a huge stake in American society. I studied political science. Dr. Valley got my degree in political science. I am an attorney. I've had almost 19 years of experience, and I count my life blessed for my stepchildren. I couldn't have any, but it's as a woman and a mother, especially of stepchildren, and knowing adopted children, and knowing how many people I've talked to, how many friends and family who have suffered with infertility and cannot get pregnant. It is offensive at a basic level. And my opinion is it is hard for me to understand why any woman would be voting for the Trump and Vance ticket. Between Trump molesting women, he can't keep his hands off them. That came out in the last election, and how much more have we had in the defamation trial of E. Jean Carroll? The way that he treats women and has had affairs on multiple wives, illegitimate children. And the way that J.D. Vance is speaking, it boggles my mind that a woman can support that ticket. Chelsea, how do you feel about it?
I don't think I could have said it half as well as you. I'm also one of the childless cat ladies who apparently has no stake invested in America. So twinsies, we love that.
And you don't even have stepchildren. You have dogs.
No, I don't have children, and I don't plan on having children. What I think is interesting about it is obviously ditto to everything you've said. I couldn't have said it better. But what I feel like is concerning to me is it's this concept, this worldview he's working from that unless it affects you personally, why would you care about it, right? Like that's what he's saying when he's saying this, that he doesn't think people care about things that don't personally impact them, right? And I think that's sort of just a concerning framework to approach the world, to approach politics with. I think you can care deeply and work deeply for things that don't impact you personally. Like, I think that is a very concerning framework he's operating from to me.
Right.
You know, there's a parallel in just history. So do you know what president went around urging middle-class women to have more children?
No.
Theodore Roosevelt.
Really?
He was very concerned. And well, because he
Chelsea, your face is hilarious. Our expressions.
He thought that American bred children probably were superior to immigrants. Birth rates were declining at the time. He thought that brighter people had brighter kids. Mm-hmm. And he was concerned that, and this is a time, it wasn't too far from Germany later having eugenics.
Yeah.
And even, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. in the famous Buck versus Bell case. What was it? 3 generations of idiots, imbeciles, I forget what term he used, or enough.
Eugenics.
He upheld sterilization. And it was a time where people were concerned about basically the genetic makeup of the country. And it was like, you need to go out and have more children. This is.
It does feel somewhat like preservation of the Aryan race. I will say it's getting a little bit of those vibes because.
Well, now in fairness to Vance, he's married to someone from India.
Yes.
Or the Indian lineage.
He has 2 biracial children.
Yes,
right. So I'm not sure that I would put that on him. Vance is also he's converted to Catholicism, and Catholics generally are
no birth control,
or at least official position is no birth control and whatever. So some of it's probably coming from a place maybe not so much anti-misogynist as other, but certainly, I mean, once you say this, it's hard to take back. I'm not defending the Catwoman.
It is extremely personally offensive. And let's talk about the other things. So for me as a woman and a mother, and I don't even want to call myself a stepmother. I'm a mother.
No, you're a mother.
Right? I don't go around saying these are my stepkids. I said these are my kids. Right. Who lives with you, my son. I don't make a difference. There were so many people at one of my jobs who were shocked a year after I got there to learn that my children were my stepchildren. But it's like they're trying, this campaign is trying to be so personally offensive to so many people. So we have women and mothers in one category. So that's Vance. Now, let's skip to Trump and then go back to Vance, because we have two other groups that have been highly offended in the last 2 weeks by statements of this party. So next, let's talk about Black people and how they are being offended, personally offended, and that's through Trump. Because Trump has made, Dr. Val, I'm not sure if you've seen this, you probably have, but the statements in front of the Black journalists.
Absolutely.
That was one of the, and I watched the whole thing because I kept seeing clips of it, and I was like, oh, I need to stop what I'm doing and go watch this, because I was like, it cannot be as bad as the clips. It was by far, and I've listened to a lot of Trump speaking because we talk about it on here. This was by far the worst 34 minutes of him speaking I have ever seen in my entire life. It was so bad.
It was rough. I mean, he was making statements. He went back to, he had made a statement during the debate with Joe Biden about keeping out immigrants because they're taking Black people's jobs. Right? Black jobs. And in this recent interview with the Black journalist, someone asked him, what do you mean? What do you think are Black jobs? And I mean, how do you walk that back? Is he considering a certain type of job, a white collar, a blue collar, or whatever, a Black job that is, it's a less than type of phrase. It's an assumption that Black people have lower jobs and lesser jobs, and we, as old white men, aren't worried about immigrants taking over our positions. We're worried about them taking over the lesser positions, is the implication of that phrase, which is not going over very well. And then he took it a step farther by questioning Kamala Harris's race. And we spoke on that a couple weeks ago, where I wasn't sure because I thought she was Indian. We had a very similar conversation on this show. And I was like, oh, I thought she was Indian. And there was a quick and immediate response by both of you saying, well, she is partly. She's half Indian heritage, half Black heritage. And I was like, oh, okay.
Jamaican.
Right. So, of course, she's Black. But Trump has now doubled down and has said that she's essentially decided all of a sudden to be Black, that she's been Indian for all of these years and just now is deciding to be Black when it popularly suits her. And so now the Black community and biracial community has become inflamed by these statements of, it's become personal to them. Yeah. Of, wait a minute, are we less than? Are we not okay if we're Black? If we're biracial, can we not have our own identity as Black if we also are Indian or half white or whatever? And Dr. Vile, I see you wanting to say something. Please jump in.
Well, two things. One is, I'm still trying to figure out whether I'm an Anglo or a Saxon in terms of my own heritage. But the other thing is what you're seeing with the Harris candidacy right now is, I don't know that many people have changed their minds between Biden and Harris versus Trump. But what has happened is that both bases, Trump's base, Trump has always had a very enthusiastic base. Mm-hmm. Now, it had a ceiling on it, probably at 45%, somewhere along in there. Biden had a bigger base, but it wasn't, probably in terms of party identification, but it wasn't as enthusiastic. And what you're seeing with the Harris candidacy, and whether it'll last, we don't know.
Right.
But, some people are calling it a sugar high, new face and all of that.
A lot of enthusiasm.
What you're seeing, right? What you're seeing is not so much that more people or more women are now going to vote for Harris than we're going to vote. You don't see more women or African Americans necessarily favoring Harris over Biden, but what you see are those who are favoring Harris are now much more motivated to go out and vote. The people who have been called cat ladies and the African Americans who seem to be, you don't know if you're Black or Indian. Right. These groups are much more highly mobile, and you saw that, in fundraising. I think within a week or so of Harris being, getting sort of the crown here, They raised $100 million or so. And a lot of it from small contributors. So I think what you're seeing, that there was an enthusiasm gap in the Democratic Party. And that the irony, of course, is Trump has rightfully, been pointing to Biden's age. And, even if he's fit now, is he going to be fit 4 years from now?
Exactly.
But now the tables have been turned. He's now the oldest person ever running for president.
And now his sanity is being questioned.
Pardon?
His sanity is being questioned.
His sanity,
honestly,
yes.
No, it has been in the news. A lot of the articles that I'm reading and seeing have been saying, is he sane? Is he delusional? Is he getting forms of dementia? There are a lot of now questions age-related for him that were more for Biden before.
Right. I mean, he's always had sort of, his presentation has always been sort of a stream of consciousness. Whatever sort of pops in his mind. He's a great storyteller.
Yes.
Makes up quite a few of them.
Yeah.
What do you mean? It's not 100% accurate? What do you mean, Dr. Viola? The hugest, greatest thing ever, every time.
I didn't hear the Elon Musk thing last night, which apparently started 45 minutes late, but I did see one commentator referring it to a conversation between two grumpy old, white rich men.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I suspect his crowd size is probably bigger than ours, but I'm not sure it's as big as Harris's. So.
Yes, I agree. Like and subscribe so we can get a bigger fan base, right? We need that audience. So I'm in agreement on all of this. It's people are finding, I don't like personally how much of a role Hollywood plays in the elections. But I will say the celebrities that have come out of the woodwork with regard to these statements, it's like, if you're going to tick off someone, do you really want to tick off Taylor Swift?
Right.
Because she's now become so personally offended at the cat lady statement, because she is a cat lady according to these definitions. And how many hundreds of thousands of fans, young fans, voting age fans of Taylor Swift do you have? Then let's choose an older generation. Jennifer Aniston has come out. Giving these crushing, horrible, sad stories about her work with IVF and her attempt to have children for decades. And now she's like, I'm too old. I can't. I mean, it's heartbreaking, these things that are coming out. And as celebrity A-listers, we're drawn into their lives. And I think it's having an impact. So now let's talk about one final group of people that have been offended. It's Olympics times. We just finished the Olympics. And of all of the people out there, J.D. Vance just attacked Simone Biles
about her mental health.
Yes.
This is at least the other ones, I will say, obviously I don't agree. Anyone who listens to the show will know that. But I think at least I understood what point he was trying to make with some of the other comments. I'm so confused where he was going with this one. Like what? Because essentially he made, and I know you have to have the exact quote, but he said something about when she took time off training for mental health reasons and was applauded for that. He said that. What did he say exactly? It was weak. It was terrible. Something like that.
Essentially. Now, again, this is 2021, but it's coming out now for clear reasons. So he was during an appearance on Fox News in 2021. He spoke about, for those of you who don't know, Simone Biles is probably the best gymnast in the world and possibly in history.
Yeah.
She just won multiple gold and silver medals at the Paris Games. In Tokyo, when she went 3 years ago because of COVID, she did a vault and decided she couldn't do anymore. So she pulled out of almost everything in the Olympics. I think she did another vault or beam routine and got a bronze. But it was controversial at the time. And she was saying for her mental health, she needed to step out and not to compete. And his statements have come back, and he said, quote, "I think it reflects pretty poorly on our sort of therapeutic society that we try to praise people, not for moments of strength, not for moments of heroism, but for their weakest moments. And
Dr. Vile looks so excited.
He went on to say some very specific things more specific things about Simone Biles. And a spokesman for the Democratic National Committee said, this was last week, that Mr. Vance was in, quote, no position to be talking about anyone's weakest moments. But it's hard because now we're offending the greatest gymnast of all time, who also has a fan base, a huge fan base. And I'm very sympathetic to her cause. I have known way too many family members, friends, struggled throughout my life with depression and anxiety. And I feel like now as a mother and now as as a career woman who's struggled with stress and anxiety and depression, that I'm now being attacked on the second front.
So may I draw a parallel?
Please.
Tell me what presidential candidate is known for the men in the arena. Very famous quotation that, again, we said it earlier. Theodore Roosevelt. Pugnacious, right?
Okay.
Who do we admire? And what president then made this his mantra? Richard Nixon.
Oh, wow.
You could never show weakness. You always had to exude strength. And this is what, for better or worse, this is what a lot of particularly young white males are taught, right?
Yeah.
You don't cry. You get in there, no matter, they punch you, you punch them back a little bit harder. And it probably actually has some appeal among his base.
Probably.
We get a bunch of whiners and complainers. They ought to just suck it up and go out there in the arena.
Yeah.
So that's, and he probably doesn't know diddly about Biles. I mean, he's using her. And this is the problem with politics. You take somebody's very personal situation and then you use that as a manifestation of some wider societal malady. There's probably nobody or few people who have had greater discipline or have worked harder than someone like Simone Biles or any of these people in athletics.
Yeah.
And one other thing I want to get to, because this is law unscripted, right?
It is, yeah. We've gone into quite a bit of politics, but let's bring the law in.
Okay, let's talk just a little bit about Title IX.
Yes.
Because there's been Title IX basically says that federal money is not going to go to institutions unless they essentially equalize men and women's sports.
Right.
And I know people from my church congregation who were very good women's basketball players. They played half court because it was thought that they were incapable of running all the way down the court. And, many schools, all the focus was on the men's football team. Now still, as it turns out, the major focus in many schools is still on the men's football team. But you do now have women's volleyball teams that are getting attention, soccer, a lot of others. And if you look, it's almost like the Olympics were as obsessed as Trump is with crowd size, but, medal counts. Well, we tied with China for the highest number of gold, but then we had a much larger number of silver and bronze. So we were the top country.
Right.
And I would say probably half of these went to women. In gymnastics, in swimming, in track
even
and field.
Weightlifting. We got the gold in weightlifting. She was impressive.
So, it suggests, and of course we're among the most populous nations and among the richest. And so you would expect us to do well. But I suspect that we would not have done nearly as well, particularly in women's sports, had colleges and universities not, realized that they needed to make commitments to women's sports in the way that they had not previously done.
Yeah. Now I know you brought a book for us, so let's talk about your book and then let's transition over to Trump's cases.
I actually brought 2 books.
Okay.
So one, and I highly commend it, Michael Hatton, I guess he's at Yale, The Memory of 76, Revolution in American History. It's a great book for anybody who's interested in the upcoming semi-quincentennial, because he basically details how we have thought about the American Revolution and American history. And one of the fascinating things about it is we've alternated sometimes between elevating a few men like George Washington and others where we've said, no, we need to remember that there were a lot of common individuals who were also fighting in this war.
Sure.
And it's a very, he does a good job of dealing with the centennial and bicentennial celebrations and sort of popular memory. And the other book, which I highly commend, I don't know if other people are as interested in Richard Nixon as I am.
I think a lot more people are than we realize.
Well, he's
especially now.
Stone, give me his first name. That works for Trump right now.
Oh, I don't know.
Anyway, the person whose email was apparently hacked, he has a Richard Nixon tattoo, which I think he may be the only one in the country who does.
Oh my goodness.
But this is a book by one of the editors at Christianity Today called One Lost Soul, Richard Nixon's Search for Salvation. And it's a wonderful account of Nixon always sort of feeling like he had to prove himself. And in a real parallel, and I don't know that Silliman draws it out that much, but Nixon got affirmation, much as Trump seems to get affirmation from crowd size. Yeah. Nixon got affirmation by, well, this many people voted for me.
Right.
Particularly in 1972, this was a landslide victory. And that led him, great pride cometh before a fall.
Yeah.
And it led him into the kind of illegal activities and cover-ups that eventually brought him down. But it's a fascinating book. Both of them are pretty good reads.
Yeah, and there's a movie out there called Frost versus Nixon.
It's based on, and this is one of the interesting things that I did not know about this is, and I may get the amount wrong, it's highly unusual to pay someone for an interview.
Right.
But if I recall correctly, Frost paid something like $600,000.
It was an enormous amount.
Right. In order to do. And, I understand journalists' concern. I'm not sure how much different it is from somebody selling a biography for, $5 to $10 million, which Obama and, other presidents have done.
Right.
But, that's the famous interview where he basically said it wasn't if the president does it, it can't be illegal. And surprise, surprise, that's basically
now we have a Supreme Court decision.
What the Supreme Court decision seems to be indicating in this Trump versus United States.
And before we hit that, I think it's really interesting in my mind in knowing a lot about the Nixon era issues and Watergate, of his famous line where he kept saying, "I am not a crook," right? That's his famous line. Yes. And he kept trying to prove he was not a crook, but everybody believed he wasn't presidential material because he was a crook. And now it seems like, are we missing something? Because it seems like we were trying to get a crook out of the office, and now it seems like we're trying to elect one in, at least based on the findings by a jury, okay, in the New York case.
One of the fascinating things is Trump, if you talk to someone who's a strong Trump supporter, they believe that Biden is just as guilty as Trump is. He just hasn't gotten caught.
Correct.
And they associate what Trump's son has been convicted, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Or Biden's
they
son.
associate, like father, like son, like
Biden's
father.
Right.
It's all a crime family. I think there's almost no evidence at all to suggest that's true. But it is interesting how sort of tit for tat, You call me a crook, I'm going to call you a crook. It doesn't particularly matter whether there's evidence for it or not.
Yeah, and as far as evidence, I mean, just this year we had the New York case where a jury decided beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump had committed 34 felonies.
34 felonies.
Of falsification of business records in support of a felony crime.
Well, and he's lost civil suits as well.
He's lost multiple
going
civil
all the
suits.
way back to Trump University and E. Jean Carroll you mentioned earlier, and there have been others.
Right. So my big concern, I think, is what's happening now. So what's happening in these cases? We have Trump. He was supposed to be sentenced in July for the 34 felony counts, but the judge has postponed it. Chelsea, why? Why would he postpone the sentencing?
Well, I don't know if you guys remember, there was this tiny little Supreme Court case. No, I'm just joking. We're talking about the case where they talked about presidential immunity.
Trump versus U.S.
Yes, there we go. And so...
Aptly named, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, truly. And so that might impact these convictions. At least that's the position that Trump and his legal team are taking. That at least some of these are covered under this newfound presidential immunity. And so pending sort of that litigation, the judge in New York has pushed sentencing to September. I don't think we're going to have an answer to this by September, so don't really know why they didn't push it further, but that's where we are with that one.
Dr. Weil, let's do this. Can you give us a quick recap of the overall findings in the U.S. versus Trump case so we know what we're working with? Though I know everyone's still a little confused. So as best as we can, what are we working with?
It's, there's increasing criticism of the case. I had an occasion to be on radio last week with a prominent local attorney. And essentially the court has said that, there's already a prior case, Fitzgerald, in which
the Nixon case,
president was given immunity, civil immunity, for decisions he made in the course of for official duties. And the issue in Trump versus United States is whether the president can be prosecuted for criminal acts. And what the court has done is they have come up with a distinction without telling how to draw it.
But they do have certain exceptions where they are saying they're clear that that's presidential immunity. So there's some that are amorphous.
If it's a specific power granted to the president and he's specifically carrying that duty out, then he is immune from any kind of criminal prosecution. That makes me queasy. Although, I mean, there's some basis. I don't want a president being prosecuted because he decided that we needed to drop a bomb somewhere in a foreign country to protect American interests. And it turns out civilians are killed, as tragic as that is. I don't want a president criminally prosecuted from that. Although I might, if I were subsequently to find out that the president had declared that we wanted to eliminate all Jews, and so he starts dropping bombs on Israel, then I think that would probably be prosecutable.
Yeah, so we have to decide
basically
official
there's
versus...
a distinction between official acts and then so-called unofficial acts. But even there seems to be a presumption in the president's favor. We're not going to go after the president unless you can and then the problem becomes the court suggests that you can't use any evidence from official acts like speeches and whatever that he has given
to prove
as evidence that he has engaged in illegal activity for unofficial acts.
Right. Which is extremely limiting.
Right. And part of this, there does seem to be some implication that purely campaign activities may not be official acts, but the line is often close. I mean, even in allocating, if a sitting president goes and gives a speech, they may have to share between the campaign and the presidency, depending on how much of this, what part of the speech was, something the president would normally do as opposed to trying to get votes.
I mean, let's look at Biden. We've got Biden on TV giving a couple of interviews, trying to keep his job and trying to keep up his campaign. So those speeches, do you say that's presidential? Do you say that that's part of his presidential duties to speak to the country? Or was it a campaign, was it campaign related? And arguably it's both. So can you use that? I think the Supreme Court muddied the waters. Excuse me, completely muddied the waters.
Unnecessarily, because if you look at both lower court decisions were well reasoned. The court went far I think there was enough evidence in this case for the court to say, evidence is clear. Lower courts have agreed that it's clear. That's the end of it. There could be a case later where, there's a confusion as to what was official and unofficial, but to send it back, about all the case did, other than muddy the water, was to buy time for Trump prior to the election. And of course, Trump is not, Trump is going to argue, and there seems to be some precedent. We already have an unofficial precedent out there that you can indict a sitting president. And, frankly, one of the reasons he may be running for office is the thought that he can go 4 more years without being prosecuted. And by then, who's going to care, maybe?
Right. So how does this, Chelsea, you're talking about it being moved with the sentencing. How would this decision, do you think, affect the sentencing? Is there an unofficial act or an official act that we're discussing with his criminal trial in New York?
So that's where, I think so. I mean, I think that these convictions could stand, but essentially, date-wise, some of the dates of the transactions fall during his presidency. And so the argument that the Trump team is making is that means it's an official act because he was president when this happened. But it's not all of them. No, to be fair, it's not all of them. I think it's hard to make. I don't know if I buy the argument that just because it was during his presidential term that it makes it an official act. But the courts are going to kind of have to duke that out. But if they, to me, that would be a very concerning decision to say that a president paying off somebody and reporting it incorrectly.
Yeah, falsifying what it's for.
Falsifying records would be an official presidential act. Feels not great to me, a little concerning.
Yeah. I mean, it's based on, go ahead, Dr. Weil.
One of the greatest writings in American history is a pamphlet by Thomas Paine called Common Sense, in which he argues that it's time for America to cut loose from the British monarchy. And he asks the question, who then will be the king in America? And he said, in America, that we not be deficient in these honors, let's bring forth a document, put a crown on its head, on the document, and let it be known that in America, the law is king.
Yeah.
And the reason we departed from kingship was we did not believe that anyone should be above the law.
Right.
And this, to my judgment, this is a disastrous Supreme Court decision. And I hope, it's possible if Harris is elected, typically in 4 years, you get to appoint 2 new justices.
Right.
It was a 6-3 decision, so it could end up as a 5-4 decision. And actually, one of the 6, Amy Coney Barrett had a more nuanced decision here. So it could be overturned that way. But it might be one of those occasions where we need to actually, it seems crazy that we would need an amendment which says no man is above the law, including the president. But if we need it, dang it, let's do it. It seems odd that we need a provision in the Constitution saying people have religious freedom, but we put one in there just in case.
Yeah.
So maybe that would be a good use of the amending process.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm it scares me that if you get a pass for committing any crimes or criminal acts while you're president. Because if you're writing these checks for falsified, on falsified records for improper reasons that were not presidentially based, you can pay off a porn star and then pay off Michael Cohen for paying off the porn star. It seems...
That doesn't seem presidential to you, Virginia?
It doesn't.
What?
No, it really doesn't. It doesn't seem like an official
scarier,
act.
The president is the chief law enforcement officer.
And if he can't obey the law himself...
He's commander-in-chief. And, the question that was posed that the Supreme Court decision does not answer is, can he call a unit to take out his political opponent?
Right.
If he can, you can just kiss... no need to have the 250th anniversary celebration because we will have renounced the very thing that we fought the revolution for.
Yeah.
Not to be too dramatic.
No, but it is dramatic. And that's what's happening, is what's going on this year is increasingly dramatic. And I think we need to acknowledge that, that it is having significant impacts on the U.S., on the states, on individuals, and, even in Florida. So that's what's happening in the New York case. The Georgia case is indefinitely on hold while they investigate the prosecutor and decide on appeals whether the prosecutor can continue the case or not. Now we've got Florida with Judge Cannon. Judge Cannon in Florida, Judge Chutkan in D.C., and the Florida judge has dismissed all of the crimes alleged against Trump in Florida for the documents case.
Many of which happened after he left the presidency, or
Correct.
argued, particularly any cover-up or instructions to mislead.
Right, and she's dismissed the whole case.
I don't think that decision will stand.
I hope not. But the reason she did it is, in the presidential immunity case that came down, Justice Thomas wrote a concurring opinion saying, I don't understand why we have this issue at all. We shouldn't have a special prosecutor. It's unconstitutional.
Well, it's actually special counsel. It's sort of the successor to the special prosecutor, but that's the official term, I think, is special counsel.
Sure, which serves as the special prosecutor. And so he's questioning the existence of Jack Smith on these cases, saying that his involvement in the case is completely unconstitutional. So Cannon got on board, signed the document saying, I don't think this is constitutional. Jack Smith shouldn't have brought this case. Because of that, I'm dismissing the entire case. So the Florida cases right now are null and void, except on appeal. So they have gone up officially on appeal. Jack Smith is arguing that there's no reason he can't have been prosecuting these cases, that it's not unconstitutional for him to do so. And honestly, even if he did them, I'm trying to figure out why you can't just replace him. Because the facts are the facts, and the charges were found by a grand jury to have probable cause.
Okay, maybe I'm not as stupid as I thought, because this whole time I'm like, I don't understand why we couldn't just, fine, not him, pick a different person, but why can't the case continue? Okay, see, I'm not done. Look at that. I've been wondering the whole time, because
not
tricky,
at all.
Right? The argument is that he shouldn't have been chosen without separate Senate confirmation.
Right.
Whereas if he had been a U.S. attorney who had previously been Senate certified or approved, then it would be different. So, now, well, as lawyers, so help me, you could bring another case, right? I mean, you could appoint somebody. Assuming Trump isn't the next president, I doubt that he's going to appoint a special counsel to prosecute himself.
Correct. But you could, there's no reason you couldn't continue to prosecute if there's been individual grounds for probable cause found by a neutral grand jury.
Right.
You just simply replace him with somebody else who is constitutionally mandated or allowed. I don't think that's a reason to dismiss an entire case, but I don't have much faith right now in the Supreme Court So goodness knows it gets up there and they say the whole thing's out. It's sort of what's happening in Georgia is the prosecutors being questioned. Should this prosecutor remain on the case? And in Georgia, what seems to be the case is if they choose to get rid of the prosecutor on the case, it doesn't mean that the case goes away. It means that somebody else prosecutes it.
But the delay would likely, almost surely, bring it into another presidential administration.
Absolutely.
And if that's Trump, he would have the power probably to dismiss these cases.
At least the federal ones, not the state ones, but the D.C. and the Florida cases under Cannon and Chutkan.
Right.
But the Georgia case is state law.
Yes.
So not that one. And here's my thing. I don't understand this either. Now that I'm just saying all the things I don't understand why the prosecutor would just not remove themselves from the situation. Right. I understand as an attorney, you've built the case, you want to try the case, but at this point, it's more of a distraction. Step down, let somebody else do it.
These charges, this issue is bigger than me.
Yes. And I don't understand.
Biden.
Just like Biden.
Right. I just don't understand, especially in Georgia, that just get out of the way, right? Like now it has become, the story has become, the interest has become, all of the proceedings and hearings
Fani Willis instead of
about Fani Willis's affair. Right.
And I think that's, it's easy for me to say, I suppose, from the outside to be like, just remove yourself from the situation. It's not helping. It's never going to help. Even if all of this goes in her favor and she can stay on the case, I don't think that's going to bode very well for the criminal case as it plays out.
I agree. So let's talk about the final one, the D.C. case with Judge Chutkan. It was returned, right, but down to her court from the Supreme Court for the trial court to decide what are official and unofficial acts. So
what
she's
a gift.
Picked
what a gift.
Right? She's picked the case back up. And Dr. Weil, where does it stand right now then?
Well, she did dismiss a case, right, that Trump had brought on for malicious prosecution.
Correct.
And she had, and it's a very well-reasoned decision. I've read it, and it basically says it's one thing to assert, it's quite another to give proof. And she said there was inadequate proof. You know, there's another case that I think is very bizarre. In Florida, well, related to the Florida case, Trump has now sued for $100 million for destruction of Mar-a-Lago in the FBI search. I don't think he has a prayer.
I don't know how you win that one.
Well, I mean, 100. Well, he basically argues that the search, I don't think it's for so much for damage to Mar-a-Lago. Maybe they broke a lock or two, but it damaged his reputation by having the search in the first place.
Which
if you go there, I mean, it was a search conducted under probable cause. Everybody in the country could say my reputation was damaged because of a search.
And in honesty, I don't know how he wins that by claiming his reputation was damaged when after that search happened, he got how much extra in campaign financing?
And also
his money boosted because people thought he was being, harassed. So
how it was sort of a political
right?
What damage to his reputation? Like, what was his reputation before? What does he think his reputation was before that is now different after this? Would be maybe let's let it play out because I just would like to see what he has to say. What do you think your reputation?
Yeah, and that's in a defamation case. That's critical, right? You have to prove that your reputation was damaged.
Yes.
That's what you have to prove. And I don't know how he, of all people, can prove that his reputation was damaged by that versus anything else that he's seen or said.
If
actual
you're a public
malice.
figure, the standard for defamation, and I don't know that it is a defamation case, but standard for defamation is very high.
Actual malice.
Actual malice.
Right.
And I don't know how you prove that with the government, especially with concerns by, how many different agencies of these documents having left their possession.
And there's where Chutkan's opinion comes into play. Mm-hmm. It's one thing to assert a malicious prosecution. It's quite another to prove it.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So that's where we stand. It looks like all of the cases are delayed at this time. It looks like the DC one is the one that is going to be grappling with official versus unofficial acts. We will stay on top of that one. I think this is going to be one of the most intriguing cases as far as pretrial procedure. Are we going to hear arguments on this before we get to trial? Are we going to have testimony on just the issue of, is this an official act versus an unofficial act before it goes to the jury? Or is the jury going to be the fact finder as to what is an official and unofficial act? Are we going to have sentencing reports where the jury has list of facts that they have to check off, unofficial or official? This is such a new area that we're entering that I'm interested to see what happens.
It's a new area because it's not in the Constitution.
Correct.
And we have a court majority who has prided itself on basically strict construction.
Right.
Original meaning.
Intent.
And we know that the original meaning was that no person should be above the law.
Correct.
And we seem to have elevated somebody above the law. And one other thing we ought to mention, of course, next week is the Democratic National Convention.
It is, yes.
And one of the fascinating things about the convention is, and I'm still not sure, I guess given the shortened time Harris had to run, that it made sense to go ahead and appoint a vice president.
Right.
But if she had waited, it would give a little bit more, something to anticipate or a little bit more reason to watch.
Right. And that's what Trump did, is he waited until the convention, the Republican National Convention, to show Vance as his running mate.
But of course he had much longer to do it. Correct. One of the things that interests me about choices of vice presidential selection, and I could be wrong on this, but I believe the last time that this decision was made by a convention was 1956, where Atli Stevenson said, "I'll let Kennedy and Kefauver fight it out for the vice presidency." And when you think of, how many people criticize the Senate because each state is represented equally, how many criticize the Electoral College because you can have a popular vote winner that's not the vote winner for the Electoral College, and yet we take it for granted that the decision of the vice president is basically up to one person. And in this case, it's one person who hasn't, well, I guess she's been elected as a vice president.
Right.
But she's never held
elected.
Well,
right. Yeah. Not formally elected this year as the president contender.
And I'm not, I get the note, I get the idea. It sort of shows the evolution of the presidency, which is not simply a backup, but the vice presidency is supposed to be, well, sometimes an attack dog, but somebody who's a fellow policymaker with the president. Right. And I don't guess we've ever quite, at the Constitutional Convention, they discussed the virtue of a unitary versus a plural executive. And they came down firmly on the side of one, for purposes of responsibility, having a unitary executive. But have we moved a little bit more in the direction that when we elect a president, we're sort of electing a team? And of course, in Britain, it's even more so. If you're in a parliamentary democracy, you basically know who's going to be on the cabinet prior to making the selection.
Right.
And that, by the way, would be a way to shake things up for Harris to say, if I become president, here's who I plan to elect or choose as Secretary of State and Secretary of Treasury. There's been discussion that candidates might think about doing that, but so far I don't think any. Now, my understanding is that when Trump had his conversation with Elon Musk, he suggested that maybe he would be on his cabinet. Or as part of his administration. So I don't know how many more billionaires he's able to find, but we could approach oligarchy.
Yep. No, I that's interesting. So let me make one final comment and then we'll log off for today. I think it's the vice presidential pick. I started with a question for us of how much does it matter? Does it really affect the election? And I'm going to go back to one that I remember very, very well, which is the McCain and Palin ticket. And I still believe of all of the vice presidential picks, I think that one hurt the presidential candidate. I agree, Dr. Weil, that it doesn't necessarily affect the candidacy one way or the other. Most of the time, it seems like whoever's running for president is the main draw for the ticket. But in that particular election, I think Palin hurt McCain's ticket and may have completely cost him the election. We'll never be sure if he had picked somebody else. But I think we're looking at that territory right now is more of the Palin pick and J.D. Vance, of this unexpected chain around the neck, right? Where we weren't expecting what they're bringing to the table and what baggage they're bringing. And everybody has their own baggage.
It's the first major decision that a presidential candidate makes.
Correct.
And so to the extent that it seems to affect, tell us something about their judgment. If you make a bad call, making a good call, probably sort of a wash. If you make a bad call, it can hurt you some.
Yeah.
Dan Bush and Dan Quayle were another example of someone that I don't think really maybe hurt, certainly did not help the ticket.
Right. Okay, so that's what we have for this week. We are going to try to tape again next week. We are actually doing a little bit of traveling this next week. So we are hoping to get this video will be out early this week for us. Next week's video will be out pretty late. But stay tuned with us as we continue to work through the constitutional issues and the legal issues. I'm not sure what the next topic will be. It's hard to tell from week to week what the hottest legal topic will be, but hopefully we won't have too many additional personally offensive topics to discuss. And we wish you all a good week. Enjoy the the convention, the Democratic National Convention, and we will catch you next time on the Legal Weekly Wine.